Joining us are Guy Benson, Fox News contributor, host of The Guy Benson Show, and Democrat strategist Kevin Walling. Guy, how should one fight real or perceived injustice? By engaging in the same behavior, an eye for an eye? Or like the prophet Amos, who wanted justice and righteousness to be an ever-flowing stream? I mean, what do you think, retribution or righteousness?
I would like to see the flames of unfairness extinguished with water. I just struggle to sort of envision what that looks like under this scenario. Because time and time again, whatever you think of Donald Trump, we've now seen, you mentioned the Russia collusion hoax in 2016 and 2017, a cloud over his whole presidency. They thought they had him beat that time. Then in 2020, they manufactured the Russian disinformation lie about Hunter Biden's laptop, as you've, I think, accurately described it in New York. For a lot of Trump supporters, that just feels like 1, 2, 3 strikes. And if he's able to now win this next election in spite of all of that, I think that there will be a concern on the left that there might be some vengeance coming. And I think there'll be a lot of people on the right saying, well, the vengeance is earned or necessary.
Kevin, the reason I like having you on is because I think you're a fair person, even on issues upon which we disagree. So I'm not asking you if you agree with the anger. I am asking you if you understand it. I try to understand why the other side is angry, even if I do not agree with it. And I don't want to live in a country where this group is targeting that group based on their political ideology. So how do we get out of what is either a real or perceived eye for an eye situation, which we may be headed towards?
Trey, I really appreciate what you just said. Listen, I fully understand the anger and the frustration. I don't think Democrats in 2016 understood the anger and frustration, not necessarily about Donald Trump and these grievances, but about their state in life, right? The fact that wages weren't up, that they were stuck in the same jobs for years. And that populist rage is what fueled Donald Trump's election in 2016. But I double back to what you said in the outset, Trey, that there were 4 different grand juries that have indicted the former president among these different charges. We have got to somehow restore hope and faith in the judicial system of this country. It was a jury, a grand jury of Donald Trump's peers that have indicted him in each of these cases. In the effort in New York, it was a jury of Donald Trump's peers. Many of them have Trump social, follow the president, support the president, who ultimately decided against former President Trump. And I think what you're seeing from President Biden with his son on trial this past week, at least in his remarks from Normandy with David Muir when he sat down with him, that he will abide by the jury's ruling even if that jury votes to convict his own son and sentence his own son, and that he won't pardon his son if it comes to that. And I think that hopefully is a direction that we can all agree on and work together to restore hope in the judicial system.
You know, Guy, I actually don't think of the Hunter Biden case. I was a gun prosecutor. I would put him in drug court, to be quite candid with everyone. That puts me in the minority, but I would put him in drug court. It is really Hillary Clinton that I think back on. I mean, Kevin is correct that no grand jury, has indicted her, but it's tough to get an indictment when you don't seek one. And the way that she was investigated is very, very different from the way that Donald Trump or other Republicans. I mean, I've never heard of having fact witnesses sit in while you were interviewing. I mean, Jim Comey drafted his memo exonerating her months before he even talked to her. So, I mean, I worry about our justice system. So, Guy, let me ask you a political question, because I don't know that we're going to solve a justice question. We got 3 events as I see it. We have the sentencing of Donald Trump, we have the debates coming up, and we have his selection as a vice presidential running mate. Which of those 3 do you think has the best chance of moving the needle politically?
I'm going to say the debates, and I'm not even sure about that, though, because the obvious answer one would think under normal times or circumstances would be the felony convictions of one of the 2 candidates running for president. That would be the bombshell that could inalterably change this race. But I know it's early, and I want to see the polling averages maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now. But the early indications, including from some high-profile, high-quality polling, including our Fox polling, suggests that that really hasn't moved the needle in terms of public opinion against Donald Trump. So I'm going to go with the debates, but we'll see. This thing feels pretty locked in stone to some extent and has been for months.
Kevin, I owe you a question, and I will pay you back at some point in the future, but I got way too caught up in the prophet Amos tonight, so I apologize for that, and I owe you a question.
You were taking us to church, Trey. You were taking us to church.
Well, my mom will be happy that I know the names of any of the prophets, so
It's
hopefully
Sunday.
she's watching. But
Amen.
Thank you both for joining us on a Sunday night. We'll see you next time.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.